You know that old saying, no pain, no gain, right? The idea that to get stronger, you've got to push yourself right to the very edge. But what actually happens when you just completely drive your body into the ground? Does your mind just crumble right along with your muscles? I mean, it just feels like it should be true, doesn't it? When you're totally physically spent, your brain feels like mush. It's hard to focus, everything gets a little foggy. The common wisdom says, yeah, of course, extreme physical exhaustion tanks your brain power. But is that what's really going on? Well, to get a real answer, we're not just going to guess. We're going to go straight to the science. We're diving into a fascinating 2022 study that put this exact question to the test with a group of very serious competitive cyclists. So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll nail down what we mean by pushing past the limit. Then we'll walk through the seriously tough experiment they set up. We'll see how the body protested, how the mind held up, and finally, what it all means for how we should probably train. Okay, let's jump in. First up, pushing past the limit. Before we can get into the nitty-gritty, we have to understand a really important term that athletes and coaches throw around all the time: overreaching. Now, this isn't just about feeling tired after a hard workout. Overreaching is a specific training strategy. It's when athletes intentionally pile on so much stress that their performance actually goes down for a little while. The hope is that after a recovery period, they'll bounce back even stronger. It's a high-stakes game of planned exhaustion. So how on earth do you actually study that? That brings us to section 2, the grueling experiment. Let's see how these scientists designed a way to push athletes into that state of overreaching and measure what happened. They started with 23 well-trained male cyclists. And these aren't just weekend warriors, these guys are competitive racers. They were randomly split into 2 groups. One was the intensified training group. They were about to have a rough time. The other was the control group, who just stuck to their normal routine. The whole experiment ran for 5 weeks. Week 1, everybody just trained normally to get a baseline. Then came weeks 2 and 3, the intervention. This is where things got interesting. And finally, weeks 4 and 5 were a taper, or recovery period, where everyone cut their training in half. And here's the absolute core of the experiment. For those 2 crucial weeks, the intensified group doubled their training volume. Just think about that for a second. A massive, brutal jump in workload, all designed to push them over the edge. Meanwhile, the control group just kept on keeping on. All right, so what happens when you do that to a highly trained athlete's body? Well, that leads us right into section 3, when the body protests. And believe me, it did protest. The physical cost was immediate and pretty severe. For the group doing double the work, their average power output in a 1-hour time trial plummeted by nearly 10%. That's a huge drop. Physically, they were getting significantly weaker. The training was absolutely breaking them down. But, the psychological toll was maybe even more dramatic. They used a measure called total mood disturbance. It's a clinical way of tracking negative feelings, and that score shot up by a jaw-dropping 169%. This was way more than just tired legs. This was a deep psychological grind. And if you break that down, it paints a really clear picture. These guys felt less energetic, way more tired, and even reported feeling more confused. On top of that, their sleep got worse. By just about every psychological measure you can think of, these athletes were really, really struggling. So let's recap. Their bodies are failing, their mood is in the absolute tank. Logically, you'd think their actual brain performance would be crashing and burning too, right? Well, this is where the study delivered its biggest surprise. Welcome to section 4, but the mind endures. I'm just going to read this directly from the study's abstract because it is an absolute bombshell. Quote, "No change in any cognitive measure was observed across the study period." That's it. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Just let that sink in for a second. Even as their physical power was cratering and their mood was awful, their brains just kept on firing on all cylinders. That core assumption that physical exhaustion equals mental exhaustion was, at least in this study, completely wrong. And this wasn't just a simple memory test. They measured a whole battery of cognitive skills, everything from basic reaction speed to more complex stuff like working memory and the ability to ignore distractions. And across the board, their mental sharpness held perfectly steady. Okay, so the brain is way more resilient than we thought. That's fascinating, but it brings us to a really practical question. What was the price of all that pain? Did all that suffering actually pay off with the performance boost they were hoping for?
Remember, this is the whole point of overreaching theory. You suffer now so you get that supercompensation slingshot effect later on. So, after their 2-week recovery, did the cyclists who went through absolute hell come out stronger on the other side?
The results here are, honestly, they're stunning. The group that doubled their training and suffered for 2 weeks, they just got back to where they started. Zero improvement. All that extra pain led to absolutely no gain. But the control group, the ones who just trained normally, they actually got better than their original baseline.
So, the big stark takeaway here is that not only was there no benefit to the extreme training, it actually might have gotten in the way of the cyclists getting fitter. All that suffering wasn't just for nothing, it was counterproductive.
So, wow, what do we do with this information? This brings us to our final section, training smarter, not harder. What are the real, practical lessons we can pull from this incredible experiment? Well, first, if you're trying to figure out if you're overtraining, using cognitive tests is probably not the way to go. Your brain is just too tough. Instead, you got to pay attention to the psychological red flags. Your mood, your stress, your energy levels. Those are the sensitive markers. And maybe most importantly, this study suggests that athletes and coaches should seriously question if these extreme blocks of deliberate overreaching are even necessary. And that's really the powerful question this study leaves us with. It challenges one of the most basic ideas in all of sports. If putting yourself through the ringer doesn't guarantee you'll get better and might even make you worse, then maybe the whole no pain, no gain mantra isn't the whole story. Maybe the real answer isn't just about training harder, but about training smarter.